Hello and welcome to another Times Radio Members Question and Answer. Now today we're answering comments from our channel members on frontline episodes and other videos about the war in Ukraine and its impact on the world stage. Not that anything seems to be happening in 2026, he says with a wry smile. I'm Philip Ingram. I present Times Radio Frontline, but I'm a former senior British military intelligence officer and now a commentator on all matters geopolitics, security, defence, cyber, counterterrorism and anything else that takes my fancy. All right, let's get straight into your points because there's some good ones this week. Thank you for engaging. First one comes from Sam, and you say, talk of deals to rebuild Ukraine, steal Ukraine's natural resources and security guarantees are all getting the horse before the cart. Surely what needs to happen first is the West back Ukraine with overwhelming resources. Only complete victory by Ukraine with unconditional complete surrender by the Russians will stop this war. Well, Sam, I think you've hit the nail on the head. Russia thinks it's winning at the minute, and therefore it's got no incentive to try and stop the war. All of these talks are trying to get everyone around the table and trying to get everyone on the same piece of paper. At the minute, we haven't had the Russians and the Ukrainians around the table. In fact, if you look at the proposals that are coming out, President Zelensky of Ukraine has given some really quite big concessions in going for a peace deal or a ceasefire deal. The Russians haven't given anything. And in fact, the Russians have said that they will not go for a temporary ceasefire. Putin still thinks that he can win this militarily. And therefore, you're right. The only way is to give Ukraine the wherewithal to force the Russians to the table. You have to remember that war is diplomacy by other means. What does that mean? That means that whenever you've got two sides that fall out for whatever reason, they need to set the conditions so that they can get back around the table and talk. If those conditions can't be set by talking, they're set by fighting. And you have to get it to the point where one side or the other realizes that it can't go on any further and has to sit down and negotiate. The Ukrainians have been negotiating, but they've been doing that to maintain the support from the West. The Russians haven't hit that point yet where they feel as if they need to sit around the table and negotiate. The only effort that Putin is putting in is to play Trump. And that's exactly what he's doing. He's playing Trump because he's using it to try and undermine any support for Ukraine and to try and elongate the time that he's got for his actions in Ukraine because he still thinks he can win naively. And you're right, the only way we can therefore deal with this is to give Ukraine the wherewithal to give Russia one of the biggest hidings it has ever seen and force it to the negotiating table. We're a long way off that yet, unfortunately, but good point. Next point comes from Melissa. Melissa, hi from the United States, or hi to the United States. You say, I'm from the US. I've not only seen a woman get shot and killed by federal agents, I saw my government invade South America. We've lost our way. Is Trump an autocrat? And you then answer your own question by saying yes. Yeah, he is. He is an autocrat. But it's interesting. I am in no way a Donald Trump fan, but I see him taking action that is making the rest of the world sit up and listen. Woman shot by federal agents, the diversity that's happening inside and the polarization that's happening inside the United States, I think, is very worrying. United States, I remember visiting Georgia many years ago. The Civil War is still going on, and I couldn't believe it. So you've got a north-south divide, you've got an east-west divide, you've got ethnic divides, you've got skin color divides across the United States. What's holding it together? I haven't got a clue. And of course, Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping are stirring the pot quite happily to try and create as much division inside the United States as they possibly can, knowing full well that if the United States is inwardly focused and trying to keep itself together, it's not outwardly focused. Donald Trump is very outwardly focused, and he's sending a very clear message. I think his actions in Venezuela were sending not just a message to Venezuela, but to the Chinese influence that's growing through South and Central America, and to the links that there are between Venezuela, Iran, Russia, and China. Those links are coming out and becoming more apparent. Whether he's doing this deliberately or that is being dealt with by accident, I think probably more accident than deliberate. He's focused on Donald Trump's interests only. Have you lost your way? I think when it comes to some of the more wild comments that Trump's coming out with, for example, with what he's doing and the rhetoric that he's putting out around Greenland, yes, completely lost his way. And Greenland's an interesting one. There's a 1951 Greenland Defense Treaty, which allows the United States to put as many troops, as much military capability on the lands of Greenland without consulting with the Danish government or anything else at any time. And it's all to do with the defense of Greenland as part of a NATO framework. So why Donald Trump is going on about ownership and capturing it militarily, increasing fractures in international organizations and potentially threatening NATO, I don't know. But that's what Putin would want to happen. So, yes, interesting times. And I feel sorry for you being stuck in the United States. Stephen comes up with the next point, and you say, if any progress is made by Russia, was made by Russia in 2025, wasn't it the election of Trump and Trump's undermining the EU and NATO in Ukraine? And that is as big as winning the Cold War, which we got one time and we thought we'd won. Stephen, very interesting point. And yes, it seems as if Vladimir Putin feels as if he has won with Trump's election. And it seems as if he is managing to control the narrative through Trump. He, I think, understands Trump's weaknesses. And Trump's weaknesses are all about doing deals, but deals with regard to buildings and therefore land. And he understands the naivety that Trump is, and Trump sees geopolitics as just one big land or building deal, when it's not, because there's people involved. There's culture involved. There's a lot more complexity involved. And simplifying it down to what he keeps talking about, a deal, is embarrassing for Donald Trump. And even more embarrassing, the classic I remember from 2025 was whenever President Zelensky got ambushed in the Oval Office and Donald Trump said, "You don't have any cards." And Zelensky was sitting there knowing full well that Operation Spider's Web was going to be launched relatively soon. And I think not only did he have some cards, but he had a full house and he played it masterfully. And he keeps playing full house masterfully, as Donald Trump suggests he doesn't have any cards. The one thing that I think has happened through 2025 is Donald Trump's relevance and the relevance of America's interest to controlling what's going on in Ukraine has waned. And I think as Europe stands up, and the one thing Donald Trump has done is he's forced Europe to stand up. And I think that's a good thing. As Europe stands up, then America's importance is beginning to teeter off. That will hurt America in the long run. And Donald Trump is damaging the US defense industry in the long term. We can explore that more in other episodes. Next point comes from Marty. Marty, you say, considering of several million Epstein files, only 0.6% have been released yet. I bet Donald needs a whole lot of distraction these days. Hey, Marty, interesting point. Politicians always love something to distract people whenever things aren't going quite right. I think Donald Trump's actions in 2026 with Maduro in Venezuela and with capturing oil tankers, especially in mid-Atlantic and all the rest of it, is keeping the international press interested in other things. So let's see what happens. But he's always got in his back pocket the release of more Epstein file stuff. And it's interesting what comes out. And what then it'll be even more interesting what doesn't come out. But yeah, interesting point. And then final point comes from Jules. Jules, you say, great tie, Philip. I can't remember which tie it was I was wearing. Probably my blue one with the grey hairs on it. Thank you for your team and discussions we've listened to in 2025. Well, Jules, thank you. And for everyone else that listens in, for listening and tuning in and subscribing to Times Radio Frontline, because that's what gives us the wherewithal to continue. And of course, a very happy new year to all of you. And I hope it is a safe, peaceful and prosperous new year. Unfortunately, I don't think globally it's going to be peaceful. But anyway, thanks for watching this week's question and answer and posting your questions. Remember, if you want exclusive access to our videos and have your questions answered, please sign up for Times Radio membership and get your mates to do it. You've signed up, so get your mates to do it and get them to start posting questions. And remember, Frontline is also available in your favorite podcast channel. Just search for Times Radio Frontline. Thank you. Goodbye.